I stared at my reflection in the car window, adjusting my necklace for the 100th time. My wedding ring caught the sunlight, sending tiny prisms dancing across the glass. 6 months of marriage, and this was the moment I'd been dreading. Our first real visit to Ryan's parents' house as husband and wife. "You look perfect," Ryan said, squeezing my hand. "Mom's going to love you." I forced a smile, but my stomach churned. The last time I'd seen Diane was at our wedding, where she'd managed to criticize everything from my dress to the catering while maintaining a plastic smile. The memory of her voice still made my skin crawl. "Oh, how unique. I suppose that's what people are doing these days." I'm Neve, and I was about to walk into the lion's den. The house loomed before us, a pristine colonial with manicured hedges and perfectly aligned flower beds. Everything in its place, just like Diane preferred. Ryan grabbed our overnight bags from the trunk while I smoothed my dress, chosen specifically to meet his mother's conservative tastes. Tom, Ryan's father, opened the door before we reached it. "There's my boy!" he boomed, pulling Ryan into a bear hug. Then he turned to me, his eyes crinkling warmly. "And my new daughter! Come here, Neva." As Tom embraced me, I caught sight of Diane hovering in the doorway. Her lips were pressed into a thin line, her arms crossed over her chest. She didn't move. "Mother?" Ryan called out. "Aren't you going to say hello?" Diane's eyes swept over me like I was a piece of furniture she hadn't ordered. "Oh, I didn't see you there. Ryan, darling, come give your mother a proper hello." She brushed past me as if I were invisible, enveloping Ryan in an embrace that lasted far too long. Over his shoulder, her eyes met mine, cold and calculating. The message was clear. This is my territory. Inside, family photos covered every wall. Ryan's childhood, his graduations, family vacations. I searched for our wedding photo but found nothing. Not even a small frame tucked away on a side table. "Dinner's almost ready," Diane announced, leading Ryan toward the kitchen by his arm. "I made your favorite pot roast. The recipe's been in our family for generations." The emphasis on our family wasn't subtle. Tom touched my elbow gently. "Let me show you where to put your things, dear." Upstairs, he paused in the hallway. "Give her time," he said quietly. "Diane, she's set in her ways." The guest room was immaculate, like a hotel suite nobody had ever slept in. I placed my bag on the bed, careful not to wrinkle the perfectly pressed duvet. At dinner, Diane orchestrated the seating so Ryan sat between her and his father, leaving me alone on the other side of the table. Every time I tried to join the conversation, she'd talk over me or change the subject. "Ryan, honey, how's the new project going? The one I told you to push for?" "It's great, Mom. Actually, Neve helped me prepare the presentation." "Oh, that reminds me," Diane interrupted. "Janet's daughter just made partner at her firm. 32 and already so accomplished. Some women really know how to apply themselves." The pot roast turned to ash in my mouth. Under the table, my nails dug into my palms until they left crescent-shaped marks. Ryan remained oblivious, caught up in his mother's attention. Tom shot me sympathetic glances, but said nothing. Later that night, as I lay awake in the guest room listening to Ryan's steady breathing, I made a decision. I wouldn't cry, I wouldn't run, and I absolutely wouldn't give Diane the satisfaction of breaking me. This was just the beginning, and I had a choice to make: submit to her reign of subtle tyranny or find a way to fight back. The woman who'd birthed my husband had declared war with a smile and a passive-aggressive barb. Game on, Diane. Game on. The morning after our first night at Diane's house, I found an envelope slipped under our door. Inside was a yellowed newspaper clipping about failed marriages and the modern woman's inability to maintain traditional family values. No note, but Diane's message was crystal clear. I crumpled it in my fist just as Ryan stirred. "Everything okay?" "Perfect," I lied, shoving the clipping into my pocket. The paper felt like it was burning against my thigh. Downstairs, Diane had transformed into the picture of maternal devotion. She'd prepared a spread that belonged in a magazine: fresh scones, fruit arrangements, 3 types of juice. Ryan's eyes lit up like a child's. "Your favorite breakfast, sweetheart," she cooed, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Just like when you were little." I reached for a scone, but Diane's voice cut through the air. Oh, those have nuts. Ryan mentioned you have an allergy? I made these specially for him. My hand froze midair. I'd never told Ryan about any nut allergy because I didn't have one. Mom, what are you talking about? Neve loves nuts. Really? Diane's eyebrows arched with practiced surprise. But you told me. Well, perhaps I misunderstood. Memory isn't what it used to be. Tom cleared his throat from behind his newspaper. Diane, you never forget anything. The tension crackled like static electricity. Diane busied herself with the coffee pot, her shoulders tight. More coffee, Ryan? The beans are from that little shop you loved in college. Actually, I spoke up, Ryan's cut back on caffeine, doctor's orders. Diane's pour faltered slightly. A mother knows her son's preferences. A wife knows her husband's health concerns, I countered, maintaining eye contact. Ryan glanced between us, confusion clouding his features. It's just coffee. Of course it is, Diane interrupted, her smile never reaching her eyes. Though I do worry about all these new restrictions in your life, darling. You used to be so free-spirited. The implication hung in the air like poison gas. Later that morning, while Ryan helped Tom with some yard work, Diane cornered me in the kitchen. I'm organizing Ryan's birthday party next month, she announced, scrolling through her phone. I've already contacted his friends from college. I assume you'll want to contribute to the catering costs. Actually, I've already planned. Oh, sweetie. She patted my hand with manufactured sympathy. These things require experience, connections. I've been planning Ryan's birthdays for 34 years, but you're welcome to help. My jaw clenched. I'm his wife. For 6 months. Her smile turned razor sharp. I've been his mother for 34 years. Time will tell if you last as long as the others. Others? Oh. She pressed a hand to her chest in false concern. He hasn't told you about Caroline? Or Rebecca? Well, it's not my place. She glided away, leaving me with a head full of questions and a heart full of doubt. I knew she was playing me, but the seeds were planted. Who were Caroline and Rebecca? Why hadn't Ryan mentioned them? That evening, as we packed to leave, I found another envelope in my suitcase. Inside was a photo of Ryan with a stunning blonde at what looked like a college formal. On the back, in Diane's elegant script, "Some things are better left in the past, or are they?" I stood there, trembling with rage and uncertainty, when Tom appeared in the doorway. "Don't let her in your head," he said quietly. "It's what she does best." Why does she hate me so much? She doesn't hate you. She fears you. He sighed heavily. You're the first one who might actually be strong enough to break her hold on Ryan. As we drove home that night, Ryan chatted happily about the weekend, while I turned the photo over and over in my coat pocket. I had 2 choices: let Diane's psychological warfare break me, or find a way to beat her at her own game. The woman had decades of experience in manipulation, but I had something she didn't. Nothing left to lose. She'd made sure of that herself. 3 weeks after our visit, my grandmother's antique pearl necklace vanished during a Sunday dinner at Diane's house. The same necklace I'd worn at my wedding, the last gift from Gran before she passed. Are you absolutely certain you wore it? Diane's concern dripped like honey-coated poison as we searched the house. Memory plays such tricks sometimes. I had photo evidence, a selfie taken with Ryan in the car, pearls clearly visible. But when I tried to show her, my phone was nowhere to be found. It turned up an hour later in the garden, thoroughly soaked from the sprinkler system. How unfortunate, Diane murmured, watching me shake water from my ruined phone. Technology is so unreliable these days. The pearls never reappeared, but other things began to go missing during our visits. My favorite earrings, a bracelet from Ryan, even my wedding planner with all our original vows. Each time, Diane would orchestrate elaborate searches, making sure Ryan witnessed her dedication to helping find my misplaced items. I started documenting everything. Photos before and after visits, detailed notes of Diane's comments, timestamps of when things disappeared. The pattern was obvious, but proving it was another matter entirely. Then came the email from my boss. Nevaye, I received a concerning call from your mother-in-law, he wrote. She mentioned you've been struggling with anxiety, and might benefit from a leave of absence. Normally, I wouldn't consider family input, but given her background in psychiatric nursing. My hands shook as I read the rest. Diane had never been a nurse. She'd worked in real estate her entire life. "Everything okay?" Ryan asked, finding me still staring at my laptop. "You look pale." "Did your mother ever work in psychiatry?" He frowned. "No, why?" I closed the laptop. "No reason." That night I couldn't sleep. Next to me, Ryan's breathing was steady, untroubled. He had no idea his mother was systematically dismantling my life, piece by piece. The next morning, a thick manila envelope arrived. Inside were printouts of old social media posts, photos of me at college parties, screenshots of ancient tweets taken out of context. A post-it note read, "Would Ryan's firm appreciate seeing their rising star's wife's history?" Such a shame if this affected his promotion. I was in the bathroom, dry heaving, when my phone buzzed. A text from Tom. "Need to talk. Coffee. Alone." We met at a cafe far from both our homes. Tom looked older than I'd ever seen him, worry lines deep around his eyes. "She's done this before," he said without preamble. Caroline and Rebecca weren't just Ryan's exes. They were almost his wives. My coffee turned bitter in my mouth. What happened? Caroline's family business mysteriously lost several major clients. Rebecca's teaching career ended after anonymous complaints to her school board. He rubbed his face. "I kept quiet then. I won't make that mistake again." "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because you're different. You keep records. You think strategically." He leaned forward. "And because I found these in Diane's desk yesterday." He slid an envelope across the table. Inside were my missing pearls, broken and unstrung, along with a half-written letter to Ryan's firm detailing concerns about my stability. "She's getting bolder," Tom said. "More desperate. She knows you're stronger than the others." My phone buzzed again. Diane, asking if we'd join them for dinner that evening. She had wonderful news about Ryan's career that she wanted to share. I looked at Tom, at the scattered pearls between us, each one representing a piece of my life Diane had tried to break. "I'll be there," I texted back. Tom raised an eyebrow. "You have a plan?" "Yes," I said, gathering the pearls. "It's time to show Diane what happens when you push someone too far." I'd played defense long enough. Each pearl represented a weapon in my arsenal. Every documented lie, every manipulated situation, every orchestrated accident. Diane thought she was dismantling my life. Instead, she'd given me everything I needed to dismantle hers. The annual Morrison family barbecue should have been my moment of triumph. Instead, it became my public execution. I'd spent weeks preparing, determined to prove myself to Ryan's extended family. My potato salad recipe had won contests. The decorations were Pinterest perfect. Even my dress was carefully chosen, conservative enough for Diane's approval, but still stylish. I should have known she'd been too quiet lately. "Everyone," Diane clinked her glass as 30 relatives turned to look. "I have wonderful news. Ryan's being considered for the Singapore office." My glass nearly slipped from my hand. This was the first I'd heard of it. 3 years minimum," she continued, beaming. "Of course, with Neve's situation, I've offered to go help him settle in." The silence was deafening. Ryan shifted uncomfortably beside me. "What situation?" I asked, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. Diane's eyes widened with practiced concern. "Oh, darling, we don't need to discuss your episodes here. Family understands." "Episodes?" "Ryan told me about finding your medication." She turned to the crowd. "Depression can be so difficult for young marriages." I didn't take medication. Never had. Ryan was staring at me now, confusion etched across his face. "Mom, what are you—" "Show them the bottle, Ryan, the one you found in her drawer last week." My husband's face drained of color. I thought they were yours, Mom. You said you were holding them for—" "Why were you in my drawer?" The words came out sharper than I intended. The gathered family watched like spectators at a tennis match. Tom stood in the corner, his face dark with recognition. "Sweetheart," Diane pressed, "there's no shame in getting help. We just want what's best for Ryan's career. A fresh start in Singapore could be wonderful, for both of you. The implication hung heavy. I could either go and prove my instability in a foreign country, or stay behind and lose my husband. Ryan, I said quietly, did you accept the position? He wouldn't meet my eyes. It's not final, but Mom thinks... I didn't ask what Mom thinks. Diane stepped closer, placing a proprietary hand on Ryan's arm. Perhaps we should discuss this privately. Neve seems... agitated. That's when I saw it. The slight tremor in her hand, the calculated gleam in her eye. She'd been planning this for weeks, maybe months. The missing jewelry, the sabotaged phone, the workplace rumors. They were just practice runs. This was her endgame. Actually, I said, reaching for my phone, let's discuss it all right now. I pulled up my documentation folder, photos, dates, recordings, 3 months of methodical evidence gathering. Starting with these antidepressants you planted in my drawer, I turned to the crowd. Did anyone know Diane never worked as a psychiatric nurse? That she's been impersonating medical professionals to interfere with my job? The color drained from Diane's face. Or how about the mysterious disappearance of Ryan's previous fiancées? Caroline's ruined business? Rebecca's teaching career? Ryan's head snapped up. What? Neva, Diane's voice took on a warning edge. You're proving my point about your stability. No, Tom's voice cut through the tension. She's proving mine about yours. He stepped forward, holding up his phone. On the screen was a video, Diane in my drawer, planting the medication bottle. The family erupted in whispers. Ryan stared at his mother, decades of manipulation suddenly visible through newly cleared eyes. Singapore was never about my career, was it? He asked quietly. Diane's mask cracked. For a moment I saw raw panic in her eyes. Everything I did was for you, she whispered. No, I corrected her, my voice steady. Everything you did was for control. The barbecue ended early that day. As relatives hurried away, I stood in the aftermath of Diane's carefully constructed world crumbling around her. But instead of satisfaction, I felt hollow. Because now came the hard part, helping Ryan understand that sometimes the people who claim to love us the most are the ones who hurt us the deepest. And revenge, I was learning, wasn't always as sweet as survival. 3 days after the barbecue disaster, I found Tom waiting outside my office. His face was etched with worry lines I'd never seen before. Diane's selling the house, he said without preamble. 30 years of memories, gone. She's not even telling Ryan. The autumn wind whipped around us as we walked to a nearby cafe. My coffee grew cold while Tom explained. Diane had been systematically liquidating assets, transferring funds, preparing for something big. She's not retreating, I said. She's regrouping. Tom slid a folder across the table. Inside were bank statements, emails, phone records. I've been gathering these for months. There's more. So much more than just what she did to you. The documentation was meticulous. Diane hadn't just sabotaged Ryan's previous relationships. She'd orchestrated entire life events. Job offers that mysteriously fell through when he got too independent. Chance meetings with people she'd carefully selected. Even our first meeting hadn't been the coincidence I'd thought. She wanted you to marry Ryan, Tom said quietly. What? You were perfect, successful enough to make Ryan proud, but with just enough insecurities she could exploit. She planned to mold you, control you, then break you when you stopped being useful. My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages. Why are you showing me this now? Because she's planning something bigger than Singapore, something that could destroy both you and Ryan if we don't stop her. A text lit up my phone. Ryan, canceling our dinner plans. Emergency meeting at work about an unexpected promotion opportunity. My stomach dropped. She's not done with the Singapore plan, I realized. She's just changing tactics. Tom nodded grimly. She's convinced Ryan you're unstable. Now she'll orchestrate a series of career opportunities that will slowly separate you. Distance, doubt, divorce. That's her playbook. We have to tell Ryan everything. He won't believe it. not yet. Diane's had 34 years to build her influence. We need something undeniable. The cafe's overhead lights flickered, casting shadows across Tom's face. I have a plan, he said, but it's risky. If it fails, you could lose everything. I'm already losing everything. Losing. He pulled out one final document, a power of attorney form Diane had tried to get Ryan to sign, claiming it was for tax purposes. It would have given her control over his financial decisions. We let her think she's winning, Tom said. Let her believe her Singapore plan is working. Then we use her own tactics against her. You want me to play her game? I want you to beat her at it. My phone buzzed again, Diane this time, inviting me to lunch tomorrow, to clear the air about the barbecue incident. Her timing wasn't coincidental. She's already moving pieces into place, Tom warned. Whatever she's planning, it's happening soon. I stared at the messages on my phone, at the carefully crafted paper trail in front of me. Everything in me screamed to run straight to Ryan, to force him to see the truth. But Tom was right. Diane's influence ran too deep for frontal attacks. If we do this, I said, there's no going back. We'll be manipulating Ryan too, in a way. Sometimes, Tom replied, gathering the documents, you have to break someone's illusions to save them from a bigger lie. I thought about the medication bottle in my drawer, the missing pearls, the countless small humiliations, about Ryan's confused face at the barbecue, caught between loyalty and doubt. Okay, I said finally, tell me the plan. As Tom outlined his strategy, I felt something shift inside me. The woman who'd walked into that cafe, the one still hoping for family harmony, still clinging to moral high ground, was gone. In her place was someone harder, someone ready to fight fire with fire. One condition, I added. When this is over, we tell Ryan everything. No more secrets, no more manipulation. He deserves the whole truth. Tom nodded slowly. Even if it costs you your marriage? Even then. Tomorrow, I'd smile through lunch with Diane, play the repentant daughter-in-law, let her think she was winning. But tonight, I had evidence to gather and plans to make. The game was changing, and this time, I intended to write the rules. The trap was set perfectly, every detail planned, every contingency considered, which is exactly why I should have known it would all go catastrophically wrong. Diane arrived at our house precisely on time, wearing concern like expensive perfume. I brought those family photo albums you asked about, she said, setting down a leather-bound collection. Though I'm not sure why you needed them so urgently. Ryan sat between us on the couch, exactly as planned. Tom positioned himself by the doorway, ready for his part. The stage was set for Diane's carefully documented manipulation to come to light. Then my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Back off, or Ryan sees everything. Attached was a photo of me and Tom at the cafe, heads bent over documents. Another of us meeting in a park. A third outside my office. All perfectly innocent, all looking absolutely damning. Everything okay? Ryan asked, noticing my face. Perfect, I lied, just as Diane opened the first album. Oh, look, she cooed. Ryan's first day of school. He was so independent, barely looked back at me. Unlike now, when he needs his mother's advice about everything, don't you, darling? The plan had been simple. Let Diane incriminate herself while Tom recorded everything. Use her own words to expose her manipulation. Instead, I sat frozen, watching her play her role flawlessly, while my phone kept buzzing with more photos. Speaking of advice, Diane continued, I had lunch with Caroline yesterday. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Ryan stiffened beside me. Caroline? He asked. My ex-fiancée Caroline? Poor thing's business is struggling. She mentioned some interesting things about why she really left. Diane's eyes met mine. About certain people making certain threats. My phone buzzed again. A video this time, me telling Tom about my plans to expose Diane. The audio was edited, cutting out context, making it sound like I was plotting something sinister. Actually, Tom stepped forward right on cue. I have something everyone needs to see. So do I, Diane interrupted smoothly, pulling out her own phone. These arrived anonymously this morning. I was hoping they were fake, but... She turned to Ryan. I think you should see who your wife really is. The photos appeared one by one. Tom and me, looking conspiratorial. Documents spread between us. One particularly damning shot of him touching my hand consolingly, the angle making it appear intimate. "What is this?" Ryan's voice was hollow. "It's not—" I started, but Diane wasn't finished. "There's more," she said softly. "Bank records, phone logs, secret meetings going back months." She touched Ryan's arm. "I didn't want to believe it either, sweetheart. But when Caroline told me about similar photos from before your engagement—" "That's a lie," I said, but my voice shook. How had she known about our plan? How long had she been watching? "Show him the video," she told me. "The one you just received. Show Ryan exactly what you've been plotting with his father." Tom stepped forward. "Ryan, don't." Ryan stood up, his face ashen. "Just don't. I need air." He walked out. The front door closed with a quiet click that felt louder than a slam. Diane gathered her albums, victory gleaming in her eyes. "Such a shame," she murmured. "History really does repeat itself. First Caroline, now this. Perhaps Singapore would be best for everyone." After she left, Tom and I sat in stunned silence. "She knew," I finally said. "She knew everything. We never had a chance." "Never—" "No." I stood up, my legs shaking. "You were wrong. We can't beat her at her own game. She's had decades of practice, and My voice cracked. "I just lost my husband." My phone buzzed one final time. A message from Diane. "Checkmate, dear. Don't worry, I'll take good care of him in Singapore." I stared at our wedding photo on the wall, at Ryan's smiling face. In trying to save our marriage, I'd given Diane exactly what she needed to destroy it. The irony would have been beautiful if it wasn't so devastating. Ryan didn't come home that night, or the next. On the third day, I found moving boxes on our doorstep, Diane's final touch. I was taping up the first box when the doorbell rang. Caroline stood there looking exactly like her photos from Ryan's old albums. "We need to talk," she said, "about Diane." 10 minutes later, we sat in my kitchen, the moving boxes a silent audience. Caroline's hands shook as she pulled out a familiar-looking manila envelope. "She sent these yesterday. Said if I didn't help her, she'd make sure everyone knew about the embezzlement." "What embezzlement?" "Exactly." Caroline's laugh was bitter. "But she has documents, bank statements, all forged, all perfect, just like the ones she used 3 years ago to convince Ryan I was unstable." My phone buzzed. "Diane, final dinner tonight, 7 p.m. Don't disappoint Ryan again." Carolyn saw the message. "Don't go. It's a trap." "I know." I stood up. "That's exactly why I have to." At 6:58, I walked into Diane's house. The dining room was set for 4, crystal glasses, fine china, family silver. A farewell dinner fit for a perfect family. "Just in time," Diane smiled. "Ryan's on his way. Tom's picking him up." "How long have you been planning this?" "Since the day he met you." She adjusted a fork with precision. "You were perfect, you know. Just strong enough to make him feel successful for fixing you. Just weak enough to be controlled. Until you weren't." "Where are the real photos?" "What photos?" "The ones you edited. The originals that prove what you did to Caroline, to Rebecca, to me." Her smile never wavered. "In a very safe place, along with evidence of your affair with Tom, your mental health issues, your financial mismanagement. It's amazing what people will believe with the right documentation." The front door opened. Ryan's voice mixed with Tom's in the hallway. "It's over, Diane." "No, dear. It's just beginning. Singapore will be wonderful for those of us going." Ryan entered, his face drawn. Behind him, Tom carried a laptop. "Show him," I said quietly. Tom placed the laptop on the table, opened it to reveal a video feed. On screen was Diane's safe deposit box, its contents spread across a bank table. The real photos, the original documents, everything. "Caroline's brother works for the bank," I said. "Turns out she wasn't the only one keeping records." Diane's hand trembled, rattling the crystal. "Those are private—" "Like the private investigator you hired to follow me?" I stepped closer. The one Tom hired first? He's been working for us for weeks. Every photo you took, every document you forged, we have the originals. Ryan, Diane turned to her son. You can't believe. Stop! Ryan's voice cracked. Just stop, Mom. I found the medication you planted. Dad showed me everything. I did it for you, she whispered. Everything was for you. No. Ryan moved to stand beside me. Everything was for control. Diane's facade cracked. For a moment, I saw something raw and desperate in her eyes. You'll leave me. They all leave. You drove them away, Tom said gently. And now you're driving Ryan away too. Singapore was never real, was it? Ryan asked. The job was. Diane's laugh was hollow. I just made sure you'd need your mother there to succeed. The silence stretched like a wire about to snap. Finally, Ryan spoke. I'm not going to Singapore, and you're getting help, Mom. Professional help, or we're done. You'd choose her over your own mother? I'm choosing truth, he said, for the first time in my life. Diane looked at each of us, Ryan's determination, Tom's sadness, my quiet defiance. Her perfectly orchestrated world lay in ruins around her. What now? She asked, and for once there was no manipulation in her voice, just fear. I thought about revenge, about making her suffer as I had. Instead I said, now we all start over, with the truth. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction, it's reconstruction. The therapy office smelled like lavender and secrets. Diane sat across from me, her perfect posture a stark contrast to the casual comfort of the room. Between us, Dr. Chen waited patiently. I brought something, I said, placing Gran's broken pearl necklace on the coffee table. I found it in your jewelry box last week. Diane's fingers twitched. I was going to have it repaired. No, you weren't. The silence stretched until Dr. Chen spoke. Diane, why did you take the necklace? Because she didn't deserve it. The words burst out like water through a crack. She walked into our lives, took my son, and expected everything to be perfect. Those pearls, they represented a family history she hadn't earned. Like you earned yours? I asked quietly. Diane flinched. Your mother-in-law did the same things to you, didn't she? I pulled out an old photograph I'd found while helping Tom pack. That's why you sold her china set after she died. Why you redecorated the house. You were erasing her. She was cruel, Diane whispered. Controlling. I swore I'd never be like her? Dr. Chen leaned forward. Sometimes we recreate the very patterns we're trying to escape. Outside, rain tapped against the windows. Somewhere down the hall, a door closed softly. I found this too, I said, placing a small worn notebook beside the pearls. Your journal from your first year of marriage. Diane's face went pale. Where? The same box as the pearls. I recognized the handwriting from all those notes you left me. I opened it to a marked page. You wrote, I feel invisible in my own home, like I'm playing a part in someone else's story. A tear slid down Diane's cheek, smudging her perfect makeup. That's how you made me feel, I said. How you made Caroline feel. Rebecca. We were all just characters in your story. I was protecting him. No, you were protecting yourself from being replaced, forgotten, erased, just like you erased your mother-in-law. Dr. Chen watched us carefully. This wasn't our first session together, but it was the first time we'd approached the real wound. The pearls, Diane said finally. They reminded me of my mother-in-law's jewelry. The pieces I was never allowed to wear because I wasn't family enough. I gathered the broken strand, letting the pearls pool in my palm. Then helped me restring them, together, make them into something new. Why? Her voice cracked. After everything I did? Because we're both afraid of the same thing, losing the family we fought so hard to have. Ryan was waiting outside when we finished, Tom beside him. They'd taken to having coffee together during our sessions, rebuilding their own relationship piece by piece. Okay, Ryan asked, seeing my red eyes. Getting there. I touched the small box in my pocket, the restrung pearls, now shortened into a bracelet. The remaining beads had been made into matching pieces. One for Diane, one for any daughter we might have someday. Tom hugged Diane briefly. They weren't living together yet, but they had dinner once a week. Small steps. As we walked to our cars, Diane called out, "Neve?" I turned. "I found something else of yours. In my desk." She held out a familiar envelope. "The original photos. From your wedding. I'd like to frame one, if that's okay." The envelope felt heavy with possibility. "Come over tomorrow? We can choose one together." She nodded, and for the first time, her smile reached her eyes. Later that night, as Ryan and I got ready for bed, he noticed the new bracelet. "Gran's pearls?" "Part of them." I touched the cool beads. "The rest are waiting for the future." "You're amazing, you know that?" He kissed my forehead. "After everything she did." "It's not forgiveness," I said. "Not yet. It's reconstruction. Because sometimes the hardest person to forgive isn't the one who hurt you, but the part of yourself that wanted to hurt them back." The bracelet caught the light, each pearl holding a fragment of our shared story. Broken, restrung, transformed into something neither perfect nor ruined, just real.
I'm Emma. My first big break after college was landing a job at Mason Trading Company as a lawyer's assistant. It was a bustling place, always buzzing with activity and ringing phones that hardly ever stopped. I loved the pace, it kept me on my toes. In those early days, while I was still figuring out which elevator took me where, I ran into Tom. He worked in the purchasing department, just a corridor away from our legal offices. He was arguing over the phone about some shipment that got delayed. He hung up, noticed me watching, and rolled his eyes. "Suppliers," he muttered. "Tough day?" I asked, half smiling. "You could say that. Every day is a battlefield here. You knew?" "Yeah, just started this week. I'm Emma." "Tom. Welcome to the madness. Don't let the chaos scare you off." We started having lunch together, mostly because it was easier to navigate the huge cafeteria with someone who knew the place. Tom was easy to talk to, had a sharp wit, and wasn't shy about saying exactly what he thought. One lunch turned into many, and soon, those lunches turned into after-work drinks. Our conversations ranged from mundane work stuff to more personal topics. I learned he was an only child, adored by his mother, but constantly nagged for not living up to his potential, whatever that meant. "You haven't met my mom yet, but brace yourself when you do," Tom warned one evening as we grabbed beers after a particularly long day. "She has this idea of the perfect woman, and trust me, no one's good enough." It wasn't long before our friendship took a romantic turn. After about a year of dating, Tom proposed. The wedding was simple, but perfect, for us. We bought an apartment together with savings I had from my grandma and his savings. It felt like everything was falling into place. Life with Tom was mostly smooth, except for the occasional bickering about who forgot to buy milk or whose turn it was to clean the apartment. But nothing too heavy, just the usual stuff couples go through. Until one day, everything felt different. I was exhausted all the time, and even the smell of coffee, which I loved, made me nauseous. One morning, struggling to even get out of bed, I decided enough was enough. I booked an appointment with my doctor, thinking maybe I had the flu or something. Sitting in the waiting room, flipping through a magazine without really reading it, my name was finally called. Dr. Lena was always straight to the point, and after a few questions and tests, she dropped the news. "Well, Emma, congratulations are in order. You're pregnant." "Pregnant?" I repeated, the word foreign and heavy. "Are you sure?" "Quite sure," Dr. Lena smiled, handing me the test result. "But you need to be careful. Your body's signaling a few warning signs. Nothing too scary, but you need rest, less stress." I nodded, my mind racing. Pregnant. How would Tom react? I couldn't tell over the phone. This needed a face-to-face. Walking through the door of our apartment that evening, I found Tom on the couch, eyes glued to his phone. Tom, we need to talk, I said, my voice shaky. I went to the doctor today. We're going to have a baby. Tom's face changed. It wasn't the reaction I'd hoped for. A baby? Emma, it's not great timing, you know? We haven't even traveled like we talked about. And a baby? That's a huge change. I felt a pang in my heart. I know it's unexpected, but it's also kind of amazing, right? We're going to be parents. Tom ran his hands through his hair, a sign he was stressed. I don't know, Emma. It's too much. It's too soon. Too soon for a family with me? I asked, hurt coloring my tone. No, that's not what I mean. I just thought we'd have more time, just us two. The conversation went in circles. Tom saying it was bad timing, me trying to highlight the positive. By the end of it, Tom had closed off, and I was left feeling alone, holding on to a piece of news that should have brought us together but instead was pushing us apart. The next day, I spoke to my boss, Mr. Harlow. I needed some accommodation, given the doctor's orders. Mr. Harlow, I need to ask for a change. I'm pregnant, and there are some complications. Could I possibly work from home? Mr. Harlow, who was always more understanding than I gave him credit for, didn't hesitate. Of course, Emma. We'll set up everything you need at home. Take care of yourself and the little one. Going home that day, I hoped Tom had softened a bit. But when I told him about the remote work arrangement, his reaction was cold. So, you're just going to be home now? What about all the plans we had? I thought you'd be happy I found a solution to keep the stress down, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Emma, it's like you're not even listening. I said it's too soon for all this. Tom snapped back. I went to bed early that night, feeling the distance between us grow. As I lay there, the reality of my situation sinking in, I realized this journey was going to be tougher than I thought. The air in our apartment felt heavier these days, like each day was a cloudy one, even if the sun was shining outside. Tom's affection seemed to drain away as quickly as it came. He grew more distant, more irritated by the small ways my life had to change because of the pregnancy. He said he felt neglected, like he was second to my health and the baby's needs. His mom, Mrs. Blackwell, was no help either. She called one afternoon, her voice as cold as the winter wind. Emma, this child. It's not the right time. You should be focusing on supporting Tom, not dragging him into fatherhood. I clenched the phone tighter, fighting the sting in my eyes. It's not like I planned this by myself, Mrs. Blackwell. It's our child, not just mine. There are options, you know. You're just choosing the most selfish one. Her words sliced through me, leaving me feeling hollow inside. As if that wasn't enough, Tom's behavior started changing even more. His cologne was masked by another scent, a woman's perfume, unfamiliar and sweet, clinging to his clothes. The first time I smelled it, I convinced myself it was a mix-up at the dry cleaner. But then, it happened again. And again. He also started staying out late, mumbling about needing to catch up on work, and his weekends were booked up with sudden business trips. It was too much to chalk up to coincidence. I held my tongue, not wanting to believe the worst, but the seed of doubt was planted. I couldn't ignore it anymore. That Saturday, when Tom mentioned another business trip, I reached out to Mike, an old classmate who now worked as a detective. We met at a small cafe, the kind where you could talk without every table overhearing your conversation. Mike slid a folder across the table to me. I got what you asked for, Emma. You sure you want to see this? I nodded, not trusting my voice, and opened the folder. The photos were clear, unmistakable. There was Tom, and with him, a woman I recognized from his office, a new hire that he'd mentioned in passing. Emma, I'm sorry, Mike said, his voice low. There's video too. It's consistent. My heart sank to the soles of my feet. Thanks, Mike. I needed to know. I went home, numb and carrying the folder like it was made of lead. As I turned the key in the lock, the door swung open. Mrs. Blackwell stood there, her face twisted in disapproval. "I came to see how you are. Tom said he's worried about you, all alone here." Her eyes darted around, suspiciously. "I know about Tom. He's not on a business trip. He's with someone else, Mrs. Blackwell." She scoffed, her defense quick and sharp. "You're driving him away. Always sick, complaining, needing things. What man wants that?" "That's no excuse for cheating," I shot back, anger rising. "And you think having his baby will fix things? No one in the family wants this child, Emma. Only you." Her words were like a physical blow. "Get out," I said, my voice trembling. "Now." She threw her hands up and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The silence after was deafening. I sat on the couch, feeling numb and hollow. 30 minutes felt like an eternity as each second passed with heavy, painful ticks, echoing the throbbing in my heart. My mind was racing, but a dreadful resolve settled over me. I had to face Tom and see the truth with my own eyes. Mike had given me all the details I needed. There at the Grandview Hotel, room 718, he'd said, his voice filled with reluctant professionalism. My hands were shaking slightly as I parked the car and walked into the hotel lobby, my stomach in knots. I took the elevator, my heart pounding in my ears with each floor it passed. When the doors opened, I stepped out into a brightly lit hallway that felt too cheery for what I was about to do. Room 718 was just down the hall, and as I approached, I could hear laughter and the clinking of glasses. My hand trembled as I knocked on the door. "Room service must be here with the champagne." I heard a woman's voice, chirpy and carefree. After a few seconds that felt like hours, the door swung open. Tom looked out, his expression changing from anticipation to shock in an instant. "Emma? What? How did you find?" "I know everything, Tom," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. Without waiting for an invitation, I pushed past him into the room. The sight that greeted me was like a slap. There she was, his mistress, half-dressed, scrambling to cover up as if modesty meant anything now. Tom recovered from his initial shock and his face hardened. "Why are you here, Emma? To spy on me? To beg?" "Beg?" I echoed, incredulous, feeling a bitter laugh rise in my throat. "I came for the truth, not that you'd know anything about that." He scoffed, stepping closer. "You want the truth? Here it is. I'm not happy with you anymore. You're always so wrapped up in yourself and this baby." His mistress, now somewhat dressed, smirked and added, "Maybe if you paid more attention to him, he wouldn't be with me." Her words stung, but it was his agreement, the nod he gave her, that twisted the knife deeper. "Yeah, you should be thanking us. We're just waiting for your baby to be born. Then I can finally move on properly." The room spun around me, and a sharp pain stabbed through my abdomen. I doubled over, gasping, the shock and pain mingling into a nauseating swirl. "Tom, I think something's wrong," I managed to say, my voice a whisper of desperation. "Please, call an ambulance." He and his mistress exchanged a look, a quick, dismissive glance, and then he turned back to me. "You're probably just overreacting, like always." They dressed quickly, stepping over me as if I were just another obstacle in their path. The last thing I saw before darkness claimed me was the closing door, the click of it shutting echoing ominously in the cold, empty room. I woke up to the gentle, yet urgent, voice of a maid trying to rouse me. Ma'am, can you hear me?" Her face swam into view as I blinked away the darkness clouding my vision. The pain was still there, a dull ache that seemed to echo through my entire body. "Where am I?" My voice sounded hoarse, foreign even to my own ears. "You're still in the hotel room, dear. I found you on the floor. I'm calling an ambulance now." True to her word, the next thing I knew, I was being wheeled through the emergency room. The hospital lights were harsh, blinding, as nurses and doctors swarmed around, their voices a cacophony of concern that I could barely comprehend. They asked questions, too many questions, but all I could think about was the betrayal and the pain. Tom never showed up at the hospital. Neither did his mother. Calls went unanswered, their silence more painful than any physical wound. By the time the doctor came with the news that I had lost the baby, the grief was so heavy, so overwhelming, it was all I could do not to scream. The loss was not just a personal tragedy, it felt like an injustice, one that Tom, his mistress, and his mother had a hand in. They had abandoned me, left me alone at my most vulnerable. The bitterness and anger stewed inside me, brewing a storm. After what felt like an eternity, the hospital discharged me. I drove straight to our apartment and began packing Tom's things. Each shirt I folded, each sock I threw into the box, was a severance, a cutting of ties. With his belongings piled in the trunk of my car, I drove to Mrs. Blackwell's house. I didn't bother with niceties. I unloaded his things right in the driveway, letting them fall wherever they may. I didn't knock, I just walked in. Mrs. Blackwell was sitting in the living room, a look of resignation on her face. She knew why I was there. "Emma," she started, her tone weary, "you should just leave. Take what dignity you have left." "Dignity?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You think I came here for a lecture on dignity from you? He's my son. I stand by him. And he will be better off without you," she said bluntly. "He has excellent lawyers. You'll only embarrass yourself." At that, something snapped inside me. "Do you even care that your grandchild is gone? That your son left me alone in a hotel room to lose his child?" Her eyes flickered away, unable to meet mine. "It's a tough situation." "It's done, Emma." I stepped closer, my voice low and steady. "How did you feel, as a mother, knowing what happened? Knowing your grandchild was lost?" She didn't answer, just looked away, a crack in her composed facade. "I will see your son in court," I said, the words heavy with promise. "You can tell him that." Turning on my heel, I left her sitting there, alone with the weight of her choices. As I walked back to my car, the cool air felt sharp against my skin, but my path had never been clearer. I would fight. Not just for me, but for the life that was lost, and for the truth that needed seeing the light of day. Stepping into the courthouse, I felt every eye on me, or maybe it was just the weight of what was about to happen pressing down. My best friend from college, Lucy, was right beside me. She'd become a shark in the courtroom, known for tearing apart even the slickest defense. When I told her about everything, she didn't hesitate. "I've got this, Emma. And don't worry about the fees. This one's on me," Lucy had said, her voice fierce and reassuring. We sat at our table, papers neatly arranged, evidence at the ready. Across from us, Tom and his mistress looked competent, a smugness that irked me. As the proceedings began, their lawyer painted a picture of me as unstable, broken by grief into fabricating stories. "The plaintiff has suffered immense emotional distress, yes, which has led to these wild accusations. There is no substantial evidence of any affair or wrongdoing on my client's part." When it was our turn, Lucy stood, her presence commanding the room. "Your Honor, not only do we have substantial evidence, but we also have a testimony that will corroborate everything my client has claimed." She presented the photos first, clear and undeniable proof of the affair, passed around for the judge and eventually to the opposing counsel who looked visibly shaken as they viewed them. Next, Lucy played the video from the hotel. The room fell silent as the scene played out. I enter the hotel, then Tom and his mistress, laughing, hugging, leave the hotel without a hint of concern. "But that's not all," Lucy continued. She called the maid who found me to the stand. Her testimony was simple, but powerful. "I found her on the floor, unconscious. They were gone. She could have died." Tom's face had gone white, and his mistress couldn't sit still, her leg bouncing nervously. When they were given a chance to respond, Tom stood up, his voice shaky. This isn't how it looks. We were just scared and confused." "Scared? So you leave your pregnant wife unconscious on the floor?" Lucy shot back, her tone icy. The judge took everything into consideration, the weight of the evidence, the testimonies. After what felt like a lifetime, he spoke. "I find in favor of the plaintiff, Emma Blackwell." The evidence of infidelity and negligence is overwhelming. I am granting a 50-50 division of all marital assets, as well as financial compensation for the emotional distress caused by the actions of the defendants." As we walked out of the courtroom, Lucy elbowed me gently, a victorious glint in her eye. "How's that for justice?" I managed a small smile, feeling a mix of relief and sorrow. "Thanks, Lucy. I couldn't have done this without you." Life had been limping back to normal after the courtroom drama. I bought a small apartment, and every new piece of furniture, every picture hung, was a step away from my past torment. The only shadow that loomed over my fresh start was seeing Tom and his mistress together at work, a constant reminder of the betrayal. One afternoon, as I was sorting through some legal briefs, my phone buzzed with a number I hadn't seen in a while. It was Tom's mother, Mrs. Blackwell. "Emma, could we meet?" I need to talk to you." Her voice trembled over the phone. I hesitated, memories of our last encounter flashing through my mind. "Why should I meet you, Mrs. Blackwell?" "It's about Tom, and your company." "Please, I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important." Curiosity piqued and a bit of old loyalty to the company that stood by me, I agreed. We met at a small cafe, away from prying eyes. She looked worn, her eyes rimmed with red, as if she had been crying. "Tom, he's not the boy I raised anymore," she started, not meeting my eyes. "He and that woman, they're planning to cheat the company, sell off assets, and they want to force me out of my home." Her words hung heavy between us. I was still processing when she grabbed my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "Please, you're the only one I can trust to stop this." The plea in her eyes was real, but so was my reluctance. "Mrs. Blackwell, your family drama is not my business anymore." "It's not just family, Emma. It's your company too. They're planning something big. It could ruin everything." Her urgency struck a chord. I was, after all, part of that company. It had given me a chance when I was just a college grad, and many of my colleagues were like family. "All right, I'll look into it," I conceded, more for the company than for her. Back at work, I started digging. I quietly pulled records and contracts, tracing the trail of transactions Tom and his mistress were involved in. It didn't take long to spot irregularities. The numbers didn't add up, goods were being purchased at inflated prices, far above market value. Armed with evidence, I made my way to the director's office. Laying the documents on his desk, I watched his eyes narrow as he scanned the evidence. "This is serious," Mr. Harlow stated flatly, looking up at me. "I'll handle this from here. Thank you, Emma. You may have just saved this company from a significant loss." Leaving his office, I felt a mix of relief and anticipation. Walking past Tom and his mistress, I caught snippets of their mocking laughter. I couldn't help but smile to myself. Justice had a way of finding its path, no matter how twisted the road might be. After exposing Tom and his mistress, a full-scale investigation rippled through the company. As it unfolded, I was often called to testify, detailing every discrepancy and irregular transaction I had uncovered. The courtroom once again became a familiar setting, but this time I stood confidently, bolstered by the truth and the mountains of evidence that supported our claims. The legal battles were intense and draining. Tom and his mistress faced the consequences head-on. The company, having suffered significant potential losses, pursued justice relentlessly, culminating in a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against the duo. The verdict was as expected, guilty. The court's decision barred them from holding any senior positions in the future, a fitting end to their corporate malfeasance. Amidst the chaos, my own career took a surprising but welcome turn. The company recognized my efforts and promoted me to a senior lawyer, an acknowledgement that came with a significant award. One quiet afternoon, as I was organizing files in my new office, a spacious room with a view of the city skyline, my phone rang. The screen displayed a number I hadn't seen in a long while. "Mrs. Blackwell." "Emma, it's me," her voice came through, tinged with humility, a stark contrast to our last encounters. I wanted to thank you for saving my home from being sold out from under me." Her gratitude was genuine, and despite everything, I felt a twinge of sympathy for her. "You're welcome. I did what I felt was right." There was a pause, a breath of silence, before she added, "I was wrong about you, Emma. So very wrong. I used to think you didn't deserve my son, but I've come to realize it was he who didn't deserve you." Her words, unexpected and raw, took me by surprise. "Thank you for saying that. It means more than you might know. Could we meet? I'd like to apologize properly, face to face," she suggested, a hint of hope in her tone. I considered her request. "All right, Mrs. Blackwell. Let's meet." We decided on a quiet cafe, neutral ground, for what was to be a frank conversation. Sitting across from her, I saw the changes the months had wrought on her. Gone was the haughty demeanor, replaced by a somber reflectiveness. "Emma, I'm sorry for everything. I was blinded by my own expectations, my own desires for Tom, that I couldn't see the truth. You were always the stronger person, and I admire that deeply now," she confessed, her eyes not meeting mine. "It's been a tough journey for us all," I acknowledged, my voice steady. "But your apology is accepted, Mrs. Blackwell." We talked more, about life, about lessons learned. It was clear that friendship wasn't on the table, but mutual respect hung in the balance, a fine thread that connected our shared history. Leaving the cafe, I felt lighter, as if her words had lifted some of the shadows of the past. I walked back to my office, past the now empty desks of Tom and his mistress, a reminder of the bullet dodged. Their laughter no longer echoed through the halls. Instead, my own steps sounded a steady beat towards the future. I wiped down the last table at Joe's cafe, glancing at the clock that ticked steadily towards my freedom for the night. The diner's neon sign buzzed in the evening calm, a beacon for the occasional late-night wanderer looking for a cup of joe or a piece of pie. My apron, splattered with today's special, felt heavier with each passing minute. My shift was finally ending, and the real work, the kind that fueled my dreams, was about to begin. "Mama, I'm heading out to the Rusty Nail. They asked me to do a couple of sets tonight," I called, my voice echoing slightly in the now empty cafe. From the back, amidst the clatter of dishes, Mom's voice came, tired yet always supportive. "Sing like the angels, Elena. Make 'em listen." Inside the Rusty Nail, the atmosphere was a stark contrast to the biting cold outside. The warmth of dim lights and the murmur of scattered conversations welcomed me like an old friend. I headed straight to the tiny stage that was more an afterthought than a feature. The owner, a burly man with a smile that could light up the room, gave me a nod. "Got a good crowd tonight, Luna. Some big shot producers amongst 'em. Make it count." Luna. The name still felt new, but Mr. Carter, the producer who'd taken a chance on me a few days back, insisted it was sonorous and memorable. He was in the crowd tonight, his sharp eyes missing nothing. The set started off with some of my favorites, the notes of each song weaving through the smoky air, creating a tapestry of sound that seemed to hold the room in a trance. I poured every ounce of my soul into the lyrics, each word a testament to the years of dreaming and striving. Halfway through a particularly heartfelt ballad, I caught Mr. Carter's eye. He was nodding slightly, the ghost of a smile playing on his lips. After my set, I made my way to his table, my heart pounding not from the singing but from what this conversation could mean. "Elena, you were phenomenal," Mr. Carter said, his voice smooth like aged whiskey. "That voice of yours needs bigger stages." I blushed, tucking a loose strand of hair behind my ear. "Thank you, Mr. Carter. I'm just glad to have the gigs." He slid a card across the table. "I want you to join a course at my vocal school. Sharpen those raw edges. And then, who knows? Maybe open for some big names?" As I walked home later, under the speckled canvas of the night sky, every step felt lighter. I was going to work harder, shine brighter. Mr. Carter believed in Luna, but more importantly, I believed in myself. Ever since Mr. Carter roped me into this whirlwind of vocal drills and endless rehearsals, my life's been nothing short of a mad dash from one microphone to the next. The vocal school was tougher than anything I'd ever faced. Every day was a grind, but every note I belted out made me feel like I was inching closer to something big, something life-changing. "Elena, you're flat on the high C. Again. Focus," barked Mr. Jennings, the vocal coach who had a way of making you feel like you were back in grade school. "Sorry, I got it this time. Just, give me a sec," I replied, wiping the sweat from my brow and squaring my shoulders. "Take 5, everyone. But not you, Luna. Let's get this right," he commanded, not even looking up from his clipboard. As everyone else scattered toward the break room, I took a deep breath and prepared myself for another go. Mr. Jennings played the piano keys, giving me the cue. Hold it, there. That's it, Luna. Why can't you hit it like that every time?" he said, a rare smile breaking through his usually stern demeanor. "Just needed to warm up, I guess," I shot back with a grin, feeling a mix of relief and pride swelling inside me. Back in the break room, a couple of other students were huddled around a table, their eyes glued to their phones. "That was some note you hit there, Luna. Bet you could shatter glass with that," joked Alex, a fellow student with a knack for making everyone laugh. "Yeah, well, I'd settle for shattering expectations," I quipped, grabbing a water bottle from the fridge. The conversation turned to the upcoming showcase, where we were all supposed to demonstrate what we'd learned. It was a big deal, with scouts and agents in the audience. Just thinking about it made my stomach do flips. "You ready for the showcase, Luna? Heard some big names might be dropping by," said Alex, his tone turning serious. "Ready as I'll ever be. Just gotta keep my cool and show 'em what I'm made of," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. The day of the showcase arrived faster than a freight train. Backstage, the air was thick with nerves and hairspray. Stepping out onto the stage, the lights blinded me for a moment. I could see shadows of people out in the audience, some shifting in their seats, others silent in anticipation. The music started, and for a moment, everything else faded away. It was just me and the song. I poured every ounce of emotion I had into the lyrics, letting the melody lift me higher and higher until the final note hung in the air like a promise. The applause that followed was deafening. I couldn't help but smile, basking in the sound of it all. As I walked off the stage, Mr. Carter was waiting in the wings, his usual stern expression replaced with something softer, something akin to pride. As I changed back into my regular clothes and prepared to leave, my phone buzzed with a text from Mom. "Heard your showcase went great. So proud of you. Love you." Smiling, I typed back, "Thanks, Mom. Couldn't have gotten here without you. Love you more." Walking out into the night, the air felt different, lighter somehow, as if the evening itself was whispering of bigger stages and brighter lights just on the horizon. Life on the stage was like nothing else, and I was finally living it, big time. Mr. Carter had me opening for names that once felt like they belonged in a different universe. Each concert, each crowd was bigger, louder, more thrilling than the last. Then, at a charity gig decked out with chandeliers and swanky suits, I met David. He was one of those patrons, the kind you know have more money than they know what to do with, but he was different. He actually listened, really listened, when I sang. After my set, we got to talking, and something just clicked. "Hey, you really stole the show tonight," he said, his smile easy, his eyes kind. "Thanks, I guess I just tried to give it my all," I replied, trying to sound more casual than I felt. We started seeing each other, and it wasn't long before it turned into something real, something deep. On our 1-year anniversary, he took me to this little secluded spot overlooking the city, got down on one knee, and popped the question. My heart nearly burst out of my chest. "Yes. Of course, yes." I blurted out before he even finished asking. It was like a fairy tale, at least until the day he decided it was time I met his parents. The nerves I felt performing in front of thousands didn't come close to the anxiety of meeting David's mother. The way she looked me up and down when David introduced me, it was clear she had already formed her opinion before even a hello. "So, Elena, David tells me you're a singer. At restaurants, is it?" Her voice dripped with something colder than disdain. "Yes, Mrs. Westwood. I perform at various venues," I responded, trying to keep my voice steady. David squeezed my hand under the table, a silent plea for me to stay cool. "Well, I suppose we all do what we can with what we're given," she sighed, as if the weight of the world was on her shoulders just thinking about my upbringing. David's father, Mr. Westwood, was a stark contrast. He arrived a few days later from a business trip, and right away, he was warm and engaging. "Elena has quite the voice, Dad. She's opened for some pretty big names." David beamed, proud as could be. "That's fantastic. Music's a tough field. Takes a lot of grit," Mr. Westwood replied, his nod filled with a respect that felt like a balm to the burn Mrs. Westwood had left. But the relief was short-lived. Mrs. Westwood's comments grew sharper, more frequent. "One must wonder how a young lady gets so far in such an industry. Surely not by keeping her virtue intact," she once remarked during a dinner, her words slicing through the air like a knife. I felt my face go hot, my hands clench into fists under the table. "Mr. Carter has been nothing but a mentor to me, Mrs. Westwood." "Oh, come now, dear. We all know how these things work. A girl without a father figure is often looking for one, isn't she?" She chuckled, as if it was just a bit of harmless fun. Her refusal to see me as worthy gnawed at me, her words echoing in my head long after they were spoken. But David stood by me, his love unwavering. "Don't listen to her, Elena. You're amazing, and that's all that matters." I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. But as we started planning our wedding, Mrs. Westwood's shadow loomed large, making me wonder if I'd ever really be part of their family. The morning of my wedding, I woke up with a belly full of butterflies and a heart overflowing with love. David and I had poured our souls into every detail of the wedding. It was the day we had both been dreaming of. The venue was draped in delicate whites and soft pinks, every petal and candle placed with care. It was perfect, just like I'd always imagined. As I slipped into my dress, a stunning number that made me feel like a star in one of those fancy romance flicks, I couldn't help but catch my mom's teary-eyed smile in the mirror. The ceremony started with a swell of music, and as I walked down the aisle, all eyes on me, I saw David at the altar, looking like he'd won the lottery. My nerves settled, replaced by a fierce joy. This was it. This was our moment. As we stood before the priest, hand in hand, the traditional question came: "If anyone has any reason why these two should not be married, speak now or forever hold your peace." The silence that followed was expected. What wasn't expected was the sharp click of a heel and a voice that cut through the quiet like a knife. "I have something to say." It was Mrs. Westwood, standing up in her finery, her face set in a mask of disapproval. Murmurs swirled through the gathered crowd as she started her tirade. "This girl, Elena, is nothing but an uneducated dropout who grew up without a father. Her mother conceived her with the first man she met. Do we even know his name?" The room went dead quiet, every word from her lips a slap to my face. I felt David's grip tighten around my hands, his jaw clenched. "She barely scraped through school, and sings at night in eateries, in front of all sorts of men. This is not the kind of woman fit for our family," Mrs. Westwood declared, her voice ringing in the hall. Before I could shrink away, David stepped forward, his voice firm and loud. "Mom, stop. I love Elena. Her past doesn't matter to me. I know her heart, her strength, and her character. That's the woman I chose to marry." His words seemed to silence the room even further, if that was possible. Mrs. Westwood looked stunned, her mouth snapping shut as she realized her son was not on her side this time. The priest cleared his throat. "Shall we continue?" With a nod from us both, the ceremony went on, but the poison of her words lingered, making my hands tremble and my heart race. It wasn't until the music started for our first dance that I felt a shift. David pulled me close, his hand warm on my back. "Forget everyone else. It's just you and me now," he murmured as we swayed to the music. The first dance with David was like a dream. As we glided across the floor, his promises still echoing in my heart, I almost believed that the worst was over. As the last note of our song faded, Mrs. Westwood, flushed from too much champagne, stumbled to the center of the room, grabbing a microphone from the DJ. Such a lovely tradition, the father-daughter dance. Pity we won't see one tonight, eh? She slurred, her voice dripping with mockery. A hush fell over the room. I felt every eye on me, the weight of their stares like a blanket of ice. David's grip tightened on my hand, his whisper urgent. Ignore her, Elena, please. Before I could even muster a response, the side door creaked open, and a man, disheveled and dirty, staggered into the spotlight. My heart sank as Mrs. Westwood's cruel laughter cut through the stunned silence. Look here, perhaps this is Elena's father ready for their dance, she jeered. The room erupted in confused murmurs, some gasps, others hushed whispers. I felt my cheeks burn, my eyes stinging with unshed tears. I covered my face, unable to bear the spectacle. Suddenly, the sharp clack of heels announced my mother's arrival on the stage. Her voice, usually so gentle, was steel as she confronted Mrs. Westwood. This isn't a joke, Diane. You've gone too far. Apologize to my daughter, now. Mom demanded, her presence commanding silence. Mrs. Westwood, swaying slightly, just scoffed, her sneer evident even through her slurred words. Oh, come off it, it's just a bit of fun. Lighten up. That's when Mr. Westwood, who had been silent until now, stepped forward, his face dark with anger. Diane, enough. What are you thinking? He turned to the audience, his voice carrying a mix of embarrassment and authority. This man is an actor, hired by my wife as a distasteful joke. I apologize to everyone here, especially to Elena and her family. He then turned sharply to his wife. You need to leave, now. With a huff, Mrs. Westwood tossed the microphone down and stormed out, her exit as dramatic as her antics. As the door slammed behind her, the tension seemed to deflate slightly, and Mom came over to me, pulling me into a tight embrace. It's okay, baby. Let's not let her ruin your day, she whispered, smoothing back my hair as I fought to regain my composure. You all right to keep going? David asked, his eyes searching mine for any sign of retreat. I nodded, wiping my eyes. Yeah, let's finish this. For us. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of dances, toasts, and laughter, so much so that by the end of the night, I had almost forgotten the cruel stunt Mrs. Westwood had pulled. Almost, but not quite. Every now and then, the memory would resurface, a sharp stab reminding me that despite the beautiful vows and the joyous celebration, a shadow lingered over our new beginning. Ever since the wedding, Mrs. Westwood had been quieter, but a tiger doesn't change its stripes overnight. When she called me about a charity event she was organizing, her voice had that same old chill. Elena, you should come to the charity concert next weekend. There will be some truly talented singers there. It might be educational for you, she said, her words dripping with that familiar condescension. I bit my tongue to keep from snapping back. Sounds lovely, Diane. Who's performing? She hesitated, a scoff hidden just beneath her breath. Oh, various artists. I can't quite remember all their names. Typical Diane, setting the stage to belittle me. But I played along. Well, I'd love to attend. Thanks for the invitation. That very night, Mr. Carter, my producer, called with some interesting news. Luna, you're set to perform at a charity event next Saturday. It's a big gig, lots of high rollers. I paused, a slow grin spreading across my face as I connected the dots. This wouldn't happen to be the Westwood charity concert, would it? That's the one. How'd you guess? Mr. Carter chuckled on the other end. Just a lucky guess, I replied, my mind already ticking. Carter, let's keep it under wraps that Luna is actually Elena Westwood, okay? I want it to be a surprise. He laughed, clearly amused by the idea. You got it, Luna. They'll only see your stage name. The night of the concert, the venue was buzzing with the city's elite, all finely dressed and ready to be entertained. Mrs. Westwood was fluttering around like a peacock, greeting donors and flashing her insincere smiles. As I arrived, hidden behind the stage, I could hear her addressing the crowd. Thank you all for coming tonight. Your generosity supports a great cause. And now, please welcome the sensational Luna. The crowd clapped politely, some craning their necks to see the rising star Mrs. Westwood had boasted about. I took a deep breath and stepped into the spotlight. The hush that fell was delicious. As the first few notes of the song filled the air, I began to sing, pouring every ounce of my passion into the words. From the corner of my eye, I saw Mrs. Westwood's rigid posture falter. She fumbled with her phone, probably texting Mr. Carter in a panic. When the song ended, the applause was thunderous. I took my bow, my heart soaring as the applause washed over me. It wasn't just a performance, it was a victory. Stepping off stage, I caught snippets of conversations, praises mingled with surprise. Wasn't that Elena Westwood? Diane's daughter-in-law? Yes, the very one. Who would have thought? Mrs. Westwood cornered me backstage, her face a mask of fury barely contained. What is this stunt? You embarrassed me in front of all my guests. I met her glare with a calm I didn't feel. Diane, I was invited to sing. I just did my job. You said yourself you wanted to hear from talented singers. Her lips thinned into a line, and for a moment, I thought she might cause another scene. But she turned on her heel and stormed off instead. After my performance, David and I stood hand in hand, soaking in the success of the evening. My heart was still racing from the thrill of it all, but that high crashed down when Mrs. Westwood took the stage again. Her face twisted with disdain, she grabbed the microphone from the MC. While the voice may be delightful, let's not forget who we're applauding, she sneered, her voice echoing through the hall. This famous singer, ladies and gentlemen, is nothing but a bastard born of unknowns, and it's my duty to remind her fans of her true origins. The crowd murmured, the atmosphere thickening with tension. I felt my face drain of color, anger seething within me. Before I could react, my mom stepped onto the stage, elegant and composed, flanked by a man I'd never seen, a bit older than David. Enough, Diane. Mom's voice was calm, but carried an undeniable edge. I've had enough of your humiliations toward me and my daughter. It's time some truths came to light. She paused, giving the man next to her a nod. He stepped forward, an envelope in hand. After Elena's wedding, I hired a detective. We discovered some intriguing facts about Diane here. Mom continued, her eyes locked on Mrs. Westwood, who paled under the scrutiny. Years ago, Diane got pregnant by her boyfriend, who promptly abandoned her. Alone and desperate, she met her future husband online. Pretending to want a long correspondence, she actually planned to give up her baby at birth. The murmurs grew louder, the guests shifting uncomfortably as they absorbed the gravity of Mom's words. But fate intervened, Mom said. She kept the baby and met her husband, never revealing her past. The man beside Mom stepped forward, his voice steady but filled with emotion. I am that baby. Diane is my mother, abandoned me, and I was raised by foster parents. All my life, I've dreamed of meeting her, my biological mother. He held up the envelope. This DNA test confirms everything. Diane, you are my mother, and David is my brother. The hall erupted into whispers and gasps. Mrs. Westwood's face crumpled, her usual poise crumbling as the reality of her deceit was laid bare for all to see. Mr. Westwood, who had been standing off to the side, his expression unreadable, finally spoke, his voice booming over the noise. I can't believe this, Diane. To think you've lied about something so fundamental. I need time to think about all of this. Mr. Westwood turned and left the hall, his shoulders heavy. The crowd's buzzing grew louder, filled with indignation and shock at the duplicity of Mrs. Westwood. Amidst the chaos, she fled the room, her departure as dramatic as her life had been deceptive. Mr. Carter, who had been watching from the sidelines, approached us, a supportive smile on his face. Elena, why don't you give us one more song? One about honesty and love, perhaps? Nodding, I took the stage again. The opening notes of the song filled the room, a melody about truth and the courage it takes to face it. As I sang, the earlier tension dissipated, replaced by a collective catharsis. The applause at the end was overwhelming, not just for the performance, but for the truth. As it rang out, I saw my mom wiping away tears of pride. After the fiasco that blew up at the charity event, things changed drastically for everyone involved. Mrs. Westwood, once the queen bee of her social circles, found herself isolated after the divorce. Mr. Westwood couldn't see past the deception, and he ended their marriage, leaving her with nothing but a modest allowance. I heard through the grapevine that her former friends turned their backs, snubbing her from gatherings and charity events that she once dominated. It's like she vanished from the social scene entirely. Meanwhile, my career took off in ways I never imagined. The scandal put the spotlight on me, and not just as a singer. People were touched by the story, by the struggle and the strength it took to face down such public betrayal. Mr. Carter called me about starting my first album. "Luna, it's time to channel all this into your music. Are you ready to start on your album?" he said over the phone, his voice brimming with excitement. "You bet I am, Carter. Let's show them what I'm made of," I replied, feeling the fire of anticipation lighting up inside me. In the middle of all this, David and his newfound brother, Michael, grew close. It was a silver lining in a very dark cloud. They met up often, finding comfort and understanding in their shared, if complicated, family dynamics. One day, I sat down with my mom, the woman who stood by me through every high and every low. We were in her cozy kitchen, the smell of fresh coffee in the air. "Mom, I don't know how to ever thank you enough. You've been my rock," I started, my voice thick with emotion. "Honey, you don't need to thank me. I did what any mother would do. Plus, seeing you handle everything with such grace, that's all the thanks I need," she said, her eyes misty as she sipped her coffee. As I got deeper into the process of creating my album, each song felt like a piece of my journey, a melody of my trials and triumphs. David was my constant supporter, and having Michael around brought a new dimension to our lives. It was strange how life worked out, but I was grateful for where we all ended up. I'm Ellie, and here's where my story starts. Grew up in a small town, moved from one foster home to another until I landed with the Thompsons. They gave me something priceless, stability, something I craved all my young life. Life was plain till college. I was the first in my foster family to hit the big city for college, studied languages, Japanese, to be exact. Worked my butt off and got myself a translator job at an international trading company. It was a big deal for a small-town girl like me. One ordinary Tuesday, I walked into this cozy cafe near work, ordered my usual black coffee, and there he was, Jack. Tall, with a smile that could knock you off your feet. He was on his phone, looking all business but relaxed. I caught his eye, and that was it. "Hey, never seen you here before," I said, trying to sound casual as I sat down with my coffee. He looked up, his smile widening. "Just trying to escape the office chaos. I'm Jack," he replied, extending a hand. I shook it, feeling a spark. "I'm Ellie. So, what brings Mr. Escape the Office to my favorite spot?" "Good coffee and better company, it seems," he quipped. We hit it off from there. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and before we knew it, a year had passed, and we were talking about more than just coffee. Jack was from the city, knew his way around, and had a charm that was hard to resist. But life's not all smooth sailing, right? We decided to tie the knot after a year of dating. I was over the moon but wanted him to meet the folks who made me who I am, the Thompsons. Now, my foster parents, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, they were salt-of-the-earth types. Lived simply, worked hard. They were fixing up their house, so they rented this tiny apartment that was nothing to write home about. But it was warm, filled with love. I remember telling Jack, "It ain't much, but it's filled with good memories." He nodded, but I saw that look in his eyes as he scanned the cramped space. He was trying to hide it, but the man was uncomfortable. We spent the weekend there. My folks were thrilled, treated him like royalty, but Jack, he was off, always checking his watch, eager to head back. As we drove back to the city that Sunday night, the silence in the car was heavy. I had to say something. "Jack, you've been quiet. What's up?" He sighed. "Look, Ellie, your folks, they're nice and all, but we come from different worlds, you know?" His words stung, but I kept my cool. "And what's that supposed to mean?" "It's just different, Ellie. I'm not used to this simple life. But hey, it doesn't change how I feel about you," he added quickly, trying to smooth things over. I looked out the window, biting my lip, thinking about all the differences between my world and his. "Jack, I don't need fancy. But we gotta respect where we both come from, right?" He nodded. "Right, of course. I love you, Ellie. That's what matters." His words were supposed to comfort me, but a part of me wondered if we were really seeing eye to eye. That night, I lay awake, thinking about the simple life I cherished and the complicated world I was stepping into. Just a few days after our uncomfortable visit back home, it was my turn to meet the other side, Jack's mom, Vivian. A high-rise in the city center, her place was decked out in all sorts of fancy stuff that screamed money. When we arrived, she greeted us at the door, decked out in designer from head to toe, and her apartment? It was like walking into a magazine. "Ellie, is it? And what is it you do?" Vivian asked, sizing me up as if I were an item she was considering purchasing. "I'm a translator. I work with Japanese clients at a trading company," I replied, trying to sound confident. "Oh, impressive," she half smiled, but her eyes were doing another sweep, like she was looking for something off about me. Then it slipped out where I was from and about my foster parents. Her face twisted a bit. "From the province, and fostered, you say? I don't think that's quite fitting for my Jack." Jack jumped in quick. "Mom, please. Ellie's wonderful, and I love her. We're getting married." That stirred up another pot. "Married? And when is this happening? How are you planning it?" Vivian's tone shifted to something a bit too curious. "We're thinking something small, intimate. Just us in Hawaii, actually," I said, hoping she'd catch on to the romance of it all. Vivian's eyes nearly popped out. "Hawaii? Just the two of you? No, that won't do. What will my friends think if I can't even throw my only son a proper wedding?" I tried to keep my cool. "It's our day, Vivian. We just want something true to us, without all the fuss." That did it. She huffed, "This discussion is over," and walked out of the room. Jack looked at me, apologetic, and whispered, "Let me talk to her. We'll sort this out." 4 months zipped by, and despite the rocky start, there we were in Hawaii. It was supposed to be just Jack and me, but Vivian showed up, camera in hand, ready to document every second. Every moment felt like she was there, lurking, making sure she had something to post online. Jack seemed oblivious, soaking in the sun and the ceremony. I tried to smile through it, whispering to him as we stood on the beach, "I thought it would be just us." He squeezed my hand. "I know, I'm sorry. She's just excited, I guess. Let's just try to enjoy our day." Vivian was buzzing around us, her phone always up. "Smile here. Oh, this will look fabulous on my feed." I felt like a prop in her social media show, not a bride on her wedding day. It was our special day, but somehow, it had turned into another one of Vivian's extravaganzas. Coming back home as newlyweds should have been all about those cozy, love-soaked days, you know, breakfast in bed, slow dances in the living room, that kind of stuff. And it was, at least at first. Jack slipped this stunning ring on my finger the day we got back, the kind that catches the light and just won't quit sparkling. "It's been in my family for generations," he told me, his eyes all lit up with something like pride. "Be careful with that ring, Ellie. It's more than just expensive, it's an heirloom." Vivian chimed in, hovering over us like some kind of dark cloud on a sunny day. Her reminder felt more like a warning, making my heart sink a bit. The first few weeks, Jack and I were in our little bubble, stealing kisses, making dinners together, the whole 9 yards. But then Vivian started dropping by. Unannounced. All the time. It started one afternoon when I was folding laundry and the doorbell rang. There she was, Vivian, with that look on her face like she was about to inspect a military base. "Just checking in on my favorite newlyweds," she said, but her eyes darted around like she was searching for something wrong. I tried to be polite, make small talk even as she wandered into the kitchen, her fingers sliding over every surface. "Ellie, darling, do you ever clean? And where are the fresh vegetables? A man needs his greens." Her tone was dripping with disapproval. Jack just shrugged it off when I told him later. "She means well, babe. Just try to go with it." "Go with it?" I echoed, frustration bubbling up. "Jack, she's treating me like I'm on trial in my own home." He kissed my forehead, all casual like that was supposed to fix everything. "She's lonely, Ellie. Let's just cut her some slack, okay?" Slack turned into more slack, until one day I got home late from work. We'd just signed a huge contract with a new client from Japan, and I was buzzing with the thrill of it all, that is, until I found Vivian in my living room, an uninvited storm brewing. "I heard you've been spending a lot of time at the office. Late nights, hmm?" She raised an eyebrow, her voice thick with suspicion. "Yeah, it's a big project. Lots of new opportunities." I tried to explain, but she had a different opinion. 2 days later, Vivian personally came to my office and began counting out loud the men working with me, loudly suggesting I could be having an affair with one of them. Then, without an invitation, she barged into my boss's office. Seeing he was already elderly, she loudly proclaimed, "Well, she definitely won't mess with the old man." I was mortified, my face red as a beetroot. I demanded she leave, apologizing profusely to my boss and colleagues for the disruption. Thankfully, my boss, Mr. Jackson, had a sense of humor and just laughed it off, but the damage was done. That night, I'd had enough. I cornered Jack in our bedroom, my voice low and tight. "Your mom crossed a line today, Jack. She's accusing me of cheating. It has to stop." He sighed, long and heavy. "Just try to get along. Please, for me." But getting along felt more and more like putting up with nonsense. Things between Jack and me started getting rocky, and due to the fact that Vivian was always whispering in his ear. Lately, Jack had been picking apart everything about me, from the way I dressed to the hours I worked. He had never minded before, but suddenly, everything was a problem. "Ellie, why you gotta wear that to work?" Jack frowned one morning as I got ready. "It was just a blouse and skirt combo, nothing fancy." "It's professional, Jack. What's wrong with it?" I replied, adjusting my skirt. "It's too much. You're just inviting comments, working with all those guys." His tone had an edge, and I knew this wasn't really about my clothes. That was becoming a regular thing now. It got worse on my birthday. My boss gave me a small gift, a book with a note that read, "To my practically daughter." It was innocent, a kind gesture, but Jack blew it out of proportion. "You see? That's exactly what I'm talking about. Why is he giving you gifts?" "It's not right, Ellie." Jack was livid when he saw the book. "Jack, it's just a book. He's like a father figure to me." I tried to explain, but Jack's eyes were clouded with suspicion, all thanks to Vivian's constant meddling. All this tension was a relief to escape when I headed out on a business trip to a neighboring city. Our company was setting up a new factory, and I was looking forward to the break from all the drama at home. The trip went well, and I was wrapping up with a dinner with our Japanese partners when I noticed shadows lurking near the restaurant. My heart raced. The street was dimly lit, but as I walked towards my hotel, the shadows moved closer. Panicked, I asked 2 colleagues to walk me back. As we neared the hotel entrance, the light from the lanterns revealed who was following me, Jack and Vivian. "What the hell, Jack? What are you doing here?" I blurted out, unable to hide my shock. Vivian stepped forward, her face twisted in anger. "We're making sure you're not up to no good. Can't trust you around all these men, can we?" My colleagues were staring, and I felt my face burn with embarrassment. Trying to calm the situation, I said, "This is ridiculous. You're both acting like I'm some kind of criminal." But Vivian wasn't having it. "I'll be telling your parents about this. They should know what kind of woman you've turned out to be." I couldn't hold back a bitter laugh. "Go ahead, tell them. They'll laugh you out of town." The ride back was a silent one. Jack and his mother sat in the front, and I was alone in the back seat, staring out the window, the city lights blurring into streaks of color as tears filled my eyes. I was married to the man I loved, but it felt like I was trapped in a bad dream, with Vivian as the relentless nightmare that wouldn't end. Vivian had actually gone through with her threat and showed up at my parents' place. I couldn't believe it when Mom called me, her voice shaking as she recounted what had just happened. "She was here, Ellie," Mom said, her voice strained. "She demanded to see your father right away, so I gave her the address to his workshop." I felt my stomach drop. Dad was at his workshop, where he spent most of his days crafting and creating in his element. Mom continued, "Your mother-in-law went there, saw your father in his work clothes, all stained from the glass dyes, and she just scoffed." I gripped the phone tighter, bracing myself. "When your father went over to greet her, he apologized for not shaking her hand. His were all stained from work, you know?" She looked at his hands. Ellie made a face and said something awful about coming to this backwater for nothing. My heart sank as I listened. "She said she understands now why you turned out the way you did, and just left without another word." "Thanks for telling me, Mom. I need to think about what to do." I hung up, feeling a mix of anger and hurt swirling inside. It wasn't long before Vivian made her next move. The very next day, she cornered me in the living room, her eyes cold and judgmental. "Ellie, now I see where you get your manners, or should I say, lack thereof. Your father, an ordinary worker, his hands permanently dirted. What kind of upbringing, what kind of manners, could you possibly teach any children?" I shuddered to think. Her words were like daggers, but before I could respond, Jack walked in. Instead of defending me, he went straight to his mother, taking her in his arms. "Mom, I'm sorry about all this. Ellie's family, they're just different from us." That was it. The last straw. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Different? Is that your way of saying my family isn't good enough for your high standards?" My voice broke, the hurt too deep. Jack looked at me, his eyes empty. "It's just how things are, Ellie. We come from different worlds." "So that's it, huh?" My voice rose, thick with emotion. "If I'm such a disgrace, why don't we just end this? If I'm so below you, let's get a divorce." Vivian's eyes lit up, almost gleefully. "Well, that sounds like a splendid idea." Jack just nodded, passively. "Maybe that's for the best." I spent the night in our guest room, tears streaming down my face. Every word Vivian said replayed in my mind, every dismissive glance from Jack. The man I thought I knew, the life I thought we were building, it was all a lie. The early morning light filtered through the blinds, casting a soft glow across the room as I sat on the edge of the bed, phone in hand. It was time to make some difficult calls, but necessary ones. First on my list was my boss, Mr. Jackson, whose kindness had always made the stresses of work bearable. "Mr. Jackson, it's Ellie," I started, my voice a bit shaky. "I'm facing some personal issues and need to take some time off. I can take it unpaid if necessary." "Ellie," he replied quickly, his voice laced with concern, "you're one of our most valuable team members. Take a paid vacation. Sort things out and come back when you're ready. We'll manage here." His generosity brought a lump to my throat. "Thank you, Mr. Jackson. I can't tell you how much this means to me." Next, I dialed my mother, who had always been my anchor in any storm. As soon as she answered, I spilled everything, the words tumbling out in a torrent of emotion. "Mom, it's all falling apart here. I can't do this anymore. Jack and his mom, it's just too much." Her voice was calm, soothing. "Ellie, we've been prepared for this call. Your father and I are on our way. Just pack what you need." As I ended the call, I glanced around the room, my eyes landing on the few personal items I'd brought into this house, none of which felt like they belonged. I started packing, each item a reminder of the life I thought I'd build with Jack. Vivian appeared at the doorway, her presence like a dark cloud. "Remember, Ellie, only take what you bought with your own money. Don't think about grabbing anything else," she said, her voice cold and accusing. It wasn't long before I heard the gravel crunch under the tires of an old vehicle. Looking out the window, I saw the familiar beat-up pickup truck that belonged to my parents. Jack and Vivian followed me outside, their expressions a mixture of smugness and curiosity as my parents' truck pulled up. Jack scoffed loudly. "Sure that old thing will even make it back?" My father, a quiet strength emanating from him, stepped out and faced Jack without a word. He handed over the divorce papers, his eyes steady and unwavering. Jack grabbed the papers and signed them with a smirk, his mother chuckling beside him. "Glad to be rid of this mess," he muttered. We arrived at my parents' home, a large, imposing structure that felt more like a sanctuary now. I spent the next few hours unpacking and trying to settle my nerves, the peace of the familiar surroundings slowly calming me. That evening, as I sat looking out at the garden, my phone rang. It was Vivian. "Ellie, you need to return the ring. It's a family heirloom, not a parting gift." I held the phone away for a moment, taking a deep breath before responding. "Vivian, that ring was given to me as a wedding gift. If you want it, come and get it yourself." The morning light was just beginning to spill over the horizon when I saw them from the upstairs window. Jack and his mother, Vivian, stood at the gate, staring up at the house as if they had stumbled into a fairy tale. Their expressions of disbelief were almost comical. I watched from behind the curtain, a smirk playing on my lips. They looked so out of place against the backdrop of the large, meticulously landscaped front yard, their confusion palpable. Finally, I turned away from the window, hearing the sounds of my parents downstairs. I joined them, and we shared a knowing look before stepping outside. My parents were calm and collected as they walked past Jack and Vivian without a word, heading straight for the garage. They pretended not to notice the bewildered stares from my estranged husband and his mother. As the garage door swung open, revealing the sleek lines of 3 high-end cars, I could hear the sharp intake of breath from Jack. My father chose a gleaming black sedan, and we all climbed in. Just as we were about to pull out onto the driveway, Jack found his voice. "Ellie, what is all this? This house, these cars?" I stepped out of the car, walking over to them with a calm I hadn't felt in months. "This is my family home, Jack. My father owns a glass factory and several commercial properties. This is where I grew up." Vivian's face contorted with confusion and disbelief. But your father," he was wearing work clothes, his hands were dirty. I couldn't help but smile at her naivete. "Yes, Vivian. He was launching a new product line. It's a tradition in his company to get involved, hands-on. It doesn't mean he's not successful or wealthy." They stood there, stunned, unable to reconcile the image of the hard-working man they'd seen with the opulence around them. At that moment, a group of our neighbors approached, their faces bright with smiles. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson. We heard about your latest charity event. It's wonderful what you're doing. You've got our support in the mayoral elections, you know," one of them called out cheerfully. My parents nodded and thanked them. Jack's face was a mixture of awe and regret, his eyes darting between his mother and me. Vivian looked like she had swallowed something bitter, her earlier arrogance washed away by the undeniable reality in front of her. I turned back to the car, giving Jack and his mother one last look. "Well, I guess you see things a little differently now," I said, not unkindly. Their expressions, a mix of shock and realization, were all the confirmation I needed that the past, with all its hardships and heartaches, was finally behind me. The morning's revelations hadn't even settled when Jack made his move. He shoved his mother aside with such force that she stumbled. "It's all your fault, you know. You pushed her away with your nonsense," he shouted at her, his words laced with bitterness. Then, turning to me, his demeanor changed completely. He rushed over, trying to pull me into an embrace, his hands reaching out as if trying to erase everything with a simple touch. "Ellie, please, listen to me. We were good together, weren't we? I love you, I really do," he pleaded, his voice a desperate whisper. I recoiled from his touch, the warmth we once shared long extinguished by his betrayal. "Stop, Jack. Just stop," I said firmly, pushing him away with all the strength I could muster. I quickly got into the car, my heart pounding. My father, without a word, pressed the remote control, and the garage doors began to close behind us. Jack and his mother stood there, calling out, their voices a blend of desperation and disbelief. "Ellie, please, forgive us. We didn't mean any of it," Jack yelled, his voice cracking under the strain. Vivian, scrambling on the ground for the dignity she'd lost, joined in. "Ellie, my dear, I was wrong. Please." As we drove away, the finality of the moment weighed on me, but a part of me needed closure, a definitive end to this chapter of my life. As we reached the end of the driveway, I asked my father to stop the car. Jack, thinking this was his chance, ran up to the car, his face lit up with hope. His mother, a few paces behind, tried to catch up, her earlier elegance replaced by desperation. Without a word, I rolled down the window, pulled the wedding ring from my finger, and held it out for a brief moment. Jack's eyes widened as he realized what was about to happen. "This is where it ends, Jack," I said, my voice steady. With that, I threw the ring out of the window. It glittered briefly in the morning sun before landing on the soft grass beside the road. Jack's mother, ever the opportunist, rushed to where the ring had fallen, her hands scrambling through the grass. I rolled up the window, shutting out their pleas and the painful past they represented. "Let's go, Dad," I said quietly. 2 weeks later, I was back in the city, in a new apartment that felt more like home than I'd felt in a long time. I returned to work, where Mr. Jackson welcomed me with open arms and a gentle understanding that eased my transition back into routine. Jack made several attempts to contact me, each more desperate than the last. He claimed to have cut ties with his mother, begging for another chance. But some things, once broken, can't be mended. I told him it was over for good this time, and blocked his number. No more words were needed. Let me tell you about the time I met my husband, Aaron. It was a regular Tuesday, and I was working at Marigold Fine China and Ceramics, surrounded by fancy dishes and glasses that cost more than my rent. The bell above the door jingled, and in walked a guy who seemed pretty out of place with his casual jeans and a t-shirt that looked like he might have worn it to a concert or something. "Hey, need a hand finding something?" I asked, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear as I approached him. He turned around, and yeah, he was kinda cute, not that I was looking. Yeah, thanks. It's my mom's birthday, and she's big on teapots and all that. I don't know where to start." I showed him around, pointing out some of our best sellers and the finer pieces that would make his wallet cry. He chuckled at my straightforwardness. "So, you're telling me that little pot is worth $1,000, he asked, eyebrow raised as he picked up a delicate teapot painted with roses. "Believe it or not, yeah. It's hand-painted, limited edition," I explained, watching him carefully replace it. We spent a good half-hour chatting as we walked through the aisles. He had a good sense of humor, making jokes about how a single plate cost more than his weekly groceries. "I'm Aaron, by the way," he said, extending his hand. "Elise," I replied, shaking his hand. "So, Aaron, picked any favorites yet?" He nodded towards a set with gold trim and a subtle floral pattern. "That one? It's beautiful, and I think my mom would love it." "Does it come with a don't break me guarantee?" I laughed, shaking my head. "Afraid not. But it does come with a pretty fancy box." While I wrapped up his purchase, he glanced at his phone, then looked up at me. "Hey, this might sound weird, but can I have your number? You've been really helpful, and, I don't know, maybe I could get your advice on something else?" "Like what?" More teapots? I joked, handing him his bag. Or maybe just a cup of coffee, he countered with a smile. I wrote down my number, still thinking he was just being polite. Guys like him didn't really go for girls like me, ones who spent their days selling overpriced china to people who had too much money. But the next morning, he called. The coffee date with Aaron wasn't just coffee. Turned out, the guy had a knack for making me laugh, and before we knew it, we were grabbing dinner instead of just a caffeine fix. So, Elise, tell me something. How does someone with a no bullshit attitude end up selling fancy plates to rich folks? Aaron asked as he sipped his coffee, watching me over the rim of his cup. I shrugged, poking at my salad. Gotta pay the bills somehow. Plus, it's kind of fun watching people freak out over which set of plates will impress their snooty friends more. He laughed, that hearty kind of laugh that made you want to join in. Fair enough. You're pretty down to earth. I like that. The conversation flowed as easily as the coffee. We talked about everything, movies, books, our crazy families. He shared stories about his job as an architect, and I told him about my dreams of maybe opening a little cafe someday. Wait, you cook? He asked, eyebrows raised. More like I bake. Cupcakes, pies, you name it. My grandma taught me. I confessed. Damn, a baker and a plate expert? That's some combo. It felt good, you know? Being with someone who got my kind of humor and didn't expect me to be anything but myself. We started seeing each other more and more after that night, movies, walks in the park, the occasional concert when we felt like splurging. One evening, a few months in, we were at his place, a modest but cozy apartment he'd designed himself. We were on the couch, a movie forgotten on the TV as we talked about our days. Today was nuts. This lady spent an hour deciding between two identical teapots. I mean, they were literally the same, Aaron. How does that even happen? I vented, still amused by the absurdity of it. He grinned, pulling me closer. Maybe she was just trying to make a perfect choice. Kind of like how I feel with you. That caught me off guard, and I looked up at him, trying to figure out if he was joking. But he was serious. What do you mean? I mean, every day with you feels like I'm making the right choice. No second guessing, no regrets. It's easy with you, Elise. It wasn't just the words, but the way he said them, like it was the simplest truth in his world. That night, we kissed for the first time, right there on that couch, and it felt like everything just clicked. Months flew by, and soon a year had passed. Aaron and I were inseparable, and I knew I was falling hard. It was on our first anniversary that he surprised me. We went back to the same coffee shop where we'd had our first date. Elise, I've got something for you, he said, handing me a small, beautifully wrapped box. Inside was a key. I looked up at him, puzzled. It's a key to my apartment. I want you to move in, if you're up for it, he explained, his eyes searching mine for any hint of hesitation. I didn't need to think twice. Yes, I'd love to. And just like that, we started a new chapter together. Life with Aaron was as natural as breathing. He never made me feel like just a girlfriend, I was his partner, his equal. We had our moments, sure, like any couple. But even when we argued, it was never long before one of us was cracking a joke, breaking the tension. He loved my baking, always praising even my most disastrous attempts. Elise, you could burn water, and I'd still eat it, he'd tease, and I'd throw a dish towel at him, laughing. That's how it was with us. No pretenses, no drama, just two people who got each other, building a life together one day at a time. When Aaron proposed, it was simple, no big dramatic gesture, just us on the couch with a ring and him saying, "So, you want to make this official or what?" I laughed and said yes, 100 times yes. The wedding planning flew by, thanks mostly to his mom, Judy, who was a saint. She helped me pick out the dress, the flowers, everything. Aaron's dad, Mike, was seriously ill with cancer, but he was hell-bent on being there. "Wouldn't miss seeing you in that dress for the world," he joked with a wink that made me blush and laugh. The big day was a blur of smiles and tears. Mike, pale but smiling, managed to make it. Every moment felt like something out of a dream, except for Aaron's sister, Claire. She was there, all right, dressed to the nines, and looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. During the reception, I caught her eye, and she just rolled hers, whispering something to her husband who looked just as uncomfortable. It stung, but I wasn't about to let her ruin my day. After the wedding, things settled down. Or at least, they should have. I got on famously with Judy. We'd go shopping, walk around the neighborhood, or I'd just come over and help her around the house. It was during one of these days that Claire's true colors showed even brighter. One evening, we were all at Judy's for dinner. The house smelled like roast beef and the laughter was plenty, except from Claire, who seemed to have her nose turned up at everything. "Elise, dear, can you pass the salt?" Judy asked, her smile warm. As I reached over, Claire muttered loud enough for just me to hear. "Still playing the doting daughter-in-law? Trying to butter her up for the will, are you?" I paused, my hand mid-air, then passed the salt to Judy. "I'm just here to help, Claire. You should try it sometime." She scoffed, sipping her wine. "I don't need to try anything. I'm not the one who came from a little shop, trying to play high society." Her words were like a slap, but I bit back the anger. Aaron squeezed my knee under the table, his way of saying he was there for me. Later, when Judy went to bed, Aaron confronted Claire. "What's your problem with Elise? She's done nothing but good for Mom." Claire's face hardened. "You're blind, Aaron. She's here for what she can get. That's what these people do." "These people?" I snapped, unable to hold back. "You mean people who work for a living?" "Yeah, I was a saleswoman. So what? At least I'm not pretending to be something I'm not." Aaron stood up, his chair scraping back. "That's enough, Claire. If you can't be civil, maybe you shouldn't come around as much." Claire stormed out, her husband trailing behind her, throwing apologetic glances our way. Aaron and I cleaned up in silence. The next few months were tough. Mike's health declined rapidly. Despite the strain and sorrow, I tried to be there for Judy as much as I could. Mike passed away quietly one night, leaving us all a bit emptier. Aaron took it hard, and I did my best to support him, to be his rock. Claire, who'd been absent more often than not, suddenly turned up again, her eyes scanning the house like she was taking inventory. At Mike's funeral, she was tearful, playing the part of the grieving daughter, but her tears seemed as hollow as her previous accusations against me. A few weeks after Mike passed, Judy decided it was time to settle his affairs once and for all. She invited us all to dinner. As we sat around the dining table, the air thick with anticipation, Judy cleared her throat and unfolded a stack of papers. "I've got Mike's will here," Judy announced, her voice steady but soft. "He had some specific wishes about how things should be handled." Judy continued, "Half of everything goes to me, as we expected. The other half will be divided among Mike's future grandchildren." She paused, looking over her glasses. "And the firstborn grandson will receive a bonus of $200,000. Claire was practically vibrating in her seat. "Well, I guess that sets our priorities, huh?" she said, half joking but with a greed I hadn't seen so openly before. "Let's not make hasty decisions," her husband muttered, but Claire was already on a roll. "This means we start trying seriously, babe. It's important," she insisted, her voice tinged with desperation that didn't suit the dinner table. From then on, Claire's obsession with conceiving became the focal point of her life. Every family gathering, she'd update us on their progress, or lack thereof, with a frankness that bordered on uncomfortable. "We've been to 3 specialists this month alone," Claire complained one evening as we all tried to enjoy a quiet dinner. "Do you have any idea how much this is costing us?" Her fixation deepened when they moved on to artificial insemination. The hormonal treatments took a toll on her, physically and emotionally. She gained weight, which only fueled her frustration and desperation. Her struggles cast a shadow over our family meetings. Claire's obsession with getting pregnant overshadowed even simple conversations. It got to the point where I found excuses not to attend gatherings, especially if I knew she'd be there in one of her moods. Aaron tried to stay neutral, but even he was wearing thin. "She's my sister, but I can't deal with this every time we see them," he confessed one night as we lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. "I know, love. Maybe give her some space? She's got a lot on her plate right now with all the treatments and pressure," I suggested, though I felt for Claire, her behavior made it hard to be around her. As time wore on, Claire's single-minded pursuit of motherhood began to isolate her, even from those who wanted to support her. All we could do was watch and wait, hoping that something would give, for better or worse. The day Claire announced her pregnancy should have been purely joyful. "I'm pregnant," she declared during a family brunch, her eyes scanning the table for our reactions. Aaron and I offered our genuine congratulations. "That's great news, Claire. Really happy for you guys," Aaron said, passing her a smile across the table. I nodded in agreement, trying to add warmth to the tense air. Despite our attempts at keeping things friendly, Claire seemed to brew a storm inside her, always ready to snap. Her mood swings were wild, and every small thing set her off. The family tiptoed around her, but I bore the brunt of her sharp tongue more than anyone else. I learned to keep my distance, but that was about to become harder. One morning, feeling unusually queasy, I took a pregnancy test. The positive result left me stunned and elated. I shared the news with Aaron, who was over the moon. "We're going to have a baby," I whispered, and we held each other, lost in our little bubble. We decided to share the news with Judy first, hoping for a moment of happiness amid the ongoing tensions. Walking into Judy's house, hand in hand, we found not only Judy but also Claire, who'd apparently come over earlier. "Mom, Elise has something to tell you," Aaron began, his voice filled with pride. I smiled, a bit nervous about Claire's presence. "I'm pregnant, Judy. We just found out." Judy's face lit up with delight. "Oh, my darlings, that's wonderful. 2 grandchildren on the way." But Claire's reaction was far from congratulatory. Her face drained of color, and her lips thinned. "You planned this, didn't you?" she hissed, her voice low and menacing. "Trying to steal my thunder and my child's inheritance." I froze, shocked by her accusation. "Claire, that's not true. It just happened." Her voice escalated, and she stood, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You're lying. This is all a setup. You want the money, that's all you've ever wanted. We should get a DNA test on that baby. Who knows if it's even Aaron's?" Aaron stepped between us, his face dark with anger. "Enough, Claire. I won't let you insult my wife like that. You owe Elise an apology." Claire scoffed, her cheeks flushed with anger or shame, I couldn't tell. "I'm not feeling well," she muttered, grabbing her purse and storming out, leaving a stunned silence behind. Judy reached for my hand, her eyes sympathetic. "Don't mind her, dear. It's just the hormones and jealousy speaking." I tried to smile, but Claire's words had cut deep. Tears spilled over, and I wiped them angrily. "I just don't understand why she has to be so cruel," I murmured. The joy of our announcement had been overshadowed by Claire's outburst, and though Judy tried to smooth things over, the damage was done. The remainder of our visit was spent discussing baby names and plans, but Claire's shadow hung over us all. Judy called me up early on a bright Tuesday morning, her voice warm and inviting. "Elise, dear, why don't you come over for coffee? I baked your favorite apple pie," she said, and I could almost smell the sweet aroma through the phone. Glad for a reason to get out of the house, I quickly agreed. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, Judy." "Can't wait." When I arrived, the house smelled heavenly, and Judy greeted me with a hug. Inside, to my surprise, Claire was there too, looking unusually quiet and almost shy. She even managed a small smile as I walked in. "Elise, I want to apologize for last time," Claire said, her voice lower than usual. I was out of line. I've been dealing with a lot. Her apology, unexpected as it was, eased a bit of the tension I'd been carrying around. "Thanks, Claire. Let's just move forward, okay? We settled at the kitchen table, the pie between us, its scent filling the room, inviting us to forget the awkwardness. Judy poured the coffee, and we started to chat about light, inconsequential things, Judy's garden, the weather, the little one on the way. Halfway through our second slice of pie, a headache began to pound at my temples, a common annoyance during my pregnancy. I must have winced, because Judy immediately noticed. "You okay, dear? You look a bit pale." "Just a headache, nothing new these days," I replied, trying to brush it off with a smile. "Oh, I have just the thing," Judy said, rising from her seat. "I have some headache medicine that's safe for pregnancy." "Claire, honey, could you fetch it?" "It's in the medicine cabinet." Claire nodded and left to retrieve it, returning moments later with a pill and a glass of water. "Here you go, Elise. This should help." I thanked her, swallowing the pill without a second thought, trusting Judy to know what was safe. But as I took the glass back to the kitchen to rinse it out, my eyes caught on something in the trash that sent a cold shiver down my spine. Among the usual rubbish, a discarded medicine package stood out, its label stark against the banana peels and coffee grounds. It was a chemotherapy drug, one that I instantly recognized from the time we had helped Mike through his treatments. Panic seized me as I remembered the clear warnings about its effects on pregnancy. Dropping the glass in the sink, I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. The operator picked up immediately, and I quickly explained what had happened. "Ma'am, you need to try to purge that from your system immediately. Drink water and try to induce vomiting," the dispatcher instructed urgently. I turned the tap on full blast, gulping down glass after glass of water before kneeling in front of the toilet. As I forced myself to vomit, tears mixed with fear and betrayal stung my eyes. What was going on? How had this happened? My head was spinning, not just from the physical effort, but from the shock and betrayal I felt swirling inside me. When I finally managed to stagger out of the bathroom, the sight of Judy and Claire standing there, pale and confused, only intensified my feelings of unease. "What on earth is going on, Elise?" Judy's voice was filled with worry. Claire, on the other hand, looked like she was seeing a ghost, her face drained of all color. "I found something in the trash," I managed to say between gasps. It was Mike's chemotherapy drugs." "Claire, did you give me those?" Before Claire could respond, I heard sirens outside. The EMTs burst through the door, their presence a small comfort in the chaos. As they started to check on me, I dialed Aaron's number with trembling fingers. "Aaron, I need you here," I choked out as soon as he answered. He was at my side within minutes, his face etched with concern. "What happened?" he demanded, looking from me to his sister and mother. I think Claire gave me something dangerous. Not just a headache pill. I found the chemo meds in the trash right after taking what she gave me," I explained hurriedly. Claire's reaction was immediate and defensive. "You're being dramatic, Elise. I just gave you what Mom told me to. Why would I do something to hurt you?" But her words didn't sit right with anyone, not with the evidence of the discarded medication packaging that was strictly for cancer treatment. Judy, struggling to keep up, finally said, "I told her to give you paracetamol, I swear." "Claire, please tell me you didn't. Why are we even discussing this? She's just trying to get attention." Claire interrupted, her voice rising in panic. That's when Aaron stepped in, his tone icy. "We're calling the police. We need to sort this out properly." Claire paled even further, if that was possible. "The police? Aaron, come on, think this through. She's making a mistake." But it was too late. Aaron had already dialed, and within moments, the police arrived, adding another layer of seriousness to the situation. They listened to our accounts, their expressions grim. "Ma'am, we'll need to take that package of medicine for fingerprints," one of the officers said after I pointed out the trash where I had seen the discarded drugs. Claire seemed to shrink with every word the police said, her earlier bravado draining away as quickly as her color. Meanwhile, the ambulance team decided I needed to be at the hospital for a thorough checkup and possibly more treatments to ensure no residue of the harmful drug was left in my system. It was a surreal couple of days following the hospital scare. Sitting in the living room, still trying to wrap my mind around the recent events, the phone rang. Aaron answered it, his face tightening as he listened. When he hung up, he looked at me with a mix of relief and sorrow. "They arrested Claire," he said quietly. "Her fingerprints were all over the medication package." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What did she say?" "She claimed she'd touched those meds before, just moving them around in Dad's room," Aaron continued, rubbing his forehead in frustration. "But Mom told the police that wasn't possible. She said those meds were kept in a locked cabinet ever since Dad got sicker. Claire never had access until that day." A few days later, we found ourselves in a courtroom, the air thick with tension. Claire looked pale, her eyes darting around nervously. During the trial, the truth spilled out in the ugliest of ways. Under the pressure, Claire confessed. She admitted to trying to harm our unborn child to ensure her position in the inheritance queue. The courtroom was in shock. To make matters even more shocking, it emerged that Claire wasn't even pregnant. She had fooled everyone with a prosthetic belly, plotting to eventually adopt a child from another state to pass off as her own. Her deception ran deep, and even her husband was kept in the dark, told that their non-existent intimate life during her pregnancy was to protect the baby. Thankfully, the doctors confirmed that my quick actions had prevented any harm to our baby. Claire was found guilty and sentenced to 3 years in prison. Judy, with tears in her eyes, requested the court to adjust Mike's will, cutting Claire out completely. The judge agreed, and just like that, Claire's ties to her father's legacy were severed. Her husband, unable to stomach her betrayal, filed for divorce. Even Judy, who had always tried to see the best in her daughter, couldn't find it in herself to forgive Claire's actions. Months later, our lives took a happier turn. I gave birth to a healthy, beautiful boy, who had my eyes and Aaron's smile. He was our miracle after a storm, a sign that life could indeed be beautiful. According to Mike's will, he received the promised $200,000, which we decided to save for his education. One morning, sitting back, I watched our son play, his laughter filling the room, a stark contrast to the darkness we had faced. Aaron wrapped his arms around us, a silent vow that as long as we were together, nothing could break us. "Everything ended well, didn't it?" I murmured, leaning back against him. "It did," he confirmed, kissing the top of my head. "It really did." And in that moment, I knew that no matter what came our way, the love of our little family would always be our strength. We had weathered the storm, and now it was time to enjoy the calm.